Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning, everybody. How goes it?
Happy Tuesday, gentlemen.
There we go.
A
Morning.
little higher on the octave bar. Still dealing with the head.
Tommy and
How are you
Seth are
gentlemen
dealing
doing?
with a cold, so they're going to sound interesting today.
Isn't it?
I feel great. I'm just happy to be with you guys. Well, it's that time, right? Because we did the immediate, hey, 80 degrees. Do you want to go to the pool? Maybe the pools are about to
There you
close.
go.
And then all of a sudden, it's going to snow in the morning.
Oh, my
So-
goodness.
Welcome to the Midwest.
Welcome to the Midwest.
Exactly.
So, do you think we'll get another heat wave?
I
at
doubt
least,
it.
Okay.
I'm banking on another good 3-day stretch. That's like high 70s.
Okay.
I hope so.
sure.
I'd really hope. I mean, you can
Usually
hope for
happens,
things, but it's October.
Usually happens right in a good walking around when the leaves have fully turned color. It's good.
Dude, this is my favorite season, but it's not a seasonal podcast. So
It's not a seasonal pot. No, unfortunately. We run all year round.
all year.
All year round.
We never stop.
But I'm a fan of fall as well. I like the flannels. I should start bringing them out.
Flannels.
Like the leaves.
You look like a flannel type of guy.
Only recently though. Only recently, like probably within like the last year. I was sweatshirts all before that. Like probably when we start, we would know this, right? Like I was sweatshirts all the time on the podcast, and it turned into flannels all the time.
You look like you
Totally.
were born into a flannel. You just have that look.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know
And
if
it has
you're
a complete
slighting me or
compliment.
if that's a good thing.
That's a complete compliment.
I will say one thing I really like about fall. So in the new house I moved in, I love
Yeah.
the red tree, right? Like the fire maple or whatever it is, where it turns like bright red. And they're all over my neighborhood. Like every neighbor has one of these, big red trees in the yard, and they're starting to turn. And it's pretty. It's very pretty.
Dude, I'm with you. What we should do is take one of those yellow trees, the ones that turn like that same like fire yellow, and then paint on it the old Power BI symbol. If someone wants to do that for Halloween, because it is, if you look at that, at least the yellows that we have, are the yellow trees. It's the same yellow or close enough. So if there's a way to plaster on that, just a few bar charts, would be good to go.
I wonder how long we can talk while Mike just stares up in the corner of the screen.
Yeah, I'm waiting for Mike.
You guys mentioned flannel, and I'm trying to. My wife told me something yesterday. There was someone wearing a flannel shirt with fuzziness on the inside. I don't know what you call it. Like it's very fuzzy.
Oh,
And I'm trying to find the name of it. What I think it's called a flacket.
A flacket?
Maybe. I don't know.
We're you're Googling flackets.
I'm literally Googling it, trying to figure out what the heck is this thing
only buy those
called.
if you cut down trees, Mike.
Maybe. I don't know. But it's like a flannel shirt, but it has like this really nice fuzzy, soft material on the inside of it. Someone in the chat's gonna know what this is because I don't have a clue what it is. But
you like heavy duty ones, man.
It's like super warm. It's like a thing now. It's probably not a flacket. It just sounds like I'm swearing. There's some kind of jacket. I don't know what it's called. Anyways, that's what I was trying to figure out. That's why I was quiet.
Gotcha.
Those are comfy and warm though. I think you'd like one of these, Seth. I think you should go find one and get you one of these because then I think you would enjoy this new version of it's kind of like a Carhartt, but it's like flannel with like really soft stuff inside.
Maybe we should make a Power BI one, like to Tommy's point.
Yeah.
Each panel is a slightly different version of the Power BI logo.
It'd be much easier than painting a tree.
Be like a bumblebee.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand why we were painting trees, but that's okay. I still get bent
I
out of shape when
nature. I don't destroy it, Tommy.
Exactly. I also get bent out of shape when I see people using the wrong logo on stuff. Like I see the very first Power BI logo, and I'm like, what? Why are we still using this? We're three logos or icons deep now, and that is no longer. I wonder about your relevance in Power BI if you're still using the wrong logo.
No, it's called retro. See all the people with like the Toronto Blue Jays like jerseys from the 1970s because they're the light blue.
Of course.
All the powder blue.
No,
Like all retro. It means I've been in the game for a long time.
it's not retro. The better word is vintage.
Vintage.
Right? It's vintage. It's like vintage Power BI, man.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Older,
Seth's
older
literally
the
wearing
shirts,
You
the
just
oldest
called Seth
logo.
the
out.
shirts,
He
the
just pulls it
better,
up.
the better they are.
Totally dig it. Speaking of old things, this has no relation at all. I'm just going to transition. Here we go. So actually, no, maybe this does have some correlation here. Recently, I have been working with some clients on how they publish their Power BI apps. And so I have just recently noticed that if you have a Power BI app that is the old version before the audiences, so there's the new feature that came out, audiences. You can now publish an app for multiple groups of people, which is kind of cool. I like the feature. However, there was a feature on the old app publishing experience without audiences where you could allow people to take a copy of the report and build their own report connected to the original data set. So basically, you have a report and data set published. You allow people to save a copy, which would let them put that report somewhere else, but it's a live connected report back to the original report, so they could edit it.
They have
Basically.
the build permissions. Because I feel you're almost saying about the content packs.
It's not quite build permissions. It's like a second setting under. It's like there's two options. In the old settings, there was like an option for let people build from this data set, which is one option. You turn that on, and there's like a sub setting that says allow users to copy this report or copy reports in this workspace, whatever. And I can't find the same option in the new audiences app publishing experience. So I'm trying to figure out if that is a deprecated feature. You can no longer copy them. You can download the report, which I'm not sure I would always want. Anyways, it's just kind of interesting. I just found that to be my client was asking for it. I don't know if anyone else has experienced this. If we're on the chat here, if anyone else has a solution around this or has seen this before, I'm wondering if anyone else has run into this with the new app publishing experience.
It makes sense if they were to deprecate it because that I feel like that copy of the report was kind of a leftover from content packs because that goes against all the other permissions in Power BI. Like if you're going to build a report off another report, you do need build permissions, right? So you can't just enable that with the app.
Yeah, but I have built. So the thing that's interesting here is
from the content packs before build permissions was a thing.
Yeah, well, yes, but I'm thinking about the context of like apps and stuff. So you have the option to give people build permission. That's there, but you don't have the option for letting people create a copy of the report. It's like it's been locked down to another degree. And it may be me, I'm just missing a feature in the admin portal, or maybe I'm missing something in the app settings itself. I don't know, the workspace settings. Maybe there's something there that I'm missing that would give me that feature back. But in the advanced settings of the new app publishing experience, you can no longer do that. Only thing you can do now is allow people to download the app or download the report that's inside the app, which I think regardless, this is actually quite dangerous if you think about it. Yeah. If you're publishing an app and then allowing people to take copies of the report and make thin reports on top of that original data set, cool idea, but now you don't control, and those users that copy the report, if you update the model, if you update the report to have new features, those users that have copied said report don't get copies of that now anymore.
This is vintage content packs. This is literally what content packs like big selling point was.
I hated content packs.
Oh yeah, they were the worst. But that was the big reason thing.
Alone.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like the functionality I think is very useful in certain use cases. But I wouldn't I wouldn't open it up to like
I wouldn't just leave it
on every single report in an app or something like that, right?
Correct.
Like
anyways,
heebie-jeebies.
For those listening who have no idea what content packs are, if you
that was back when the logo was a different shape.
Those were not vintage.
That was back when
we used them.
That was back when Seth had the old logo on his shirt.
But a much crappier version of an app, and that was content packs. And that's all
I mean, just let's be nice. Let's be nice. It was a beta version.
It was an early version. I think a lot of the things that were not great about content packs turned into what we now do as apps.
They got the feedback that they wanted so that
Yep.
they could make something cool like apps. Man,
Exactly.
man. You just got to
100%.
spin it in a positive light, Tommy. Why are you so negative? Huh, man? Why are you so negative?
And this is coming from you.
This is true.
Well, our topic today is probably kind of related to problem solving or figuring this out. I might have to problem solve my solution around how am I going to let people save reports because their clients asking for it because it was a feature, or we figure some other solution around. Anyways, that being said, today's topic is kind of all around problem solving. So there's a really interesting article that Tommy kind of found. This is actually it's actually a mailbag item. Yeah. So someone,
mailbag. You know what that means?
Dun dun dun.
Oh.
Let me know when you want me to hit it.
Oh, I don't know if I actually. Tommy, do you have the full question?
I have the full question. I think
you got it, Seth?
Over it.
All right, Seth.
I'm ready.
All right, read the question, Seth.
All right.
Yeah, clear it out.
Hi, guys. I read this article on problem-solving methodology from McKinsey, and I found a lot of parallels with episode 117. I love that he calls that out. That's a little segue, like he knows our podcast numbers.
Love it.
I think McKinsey's podcast transcript has interesting takeaways for both report design and for borrowing from management consulting to do exploratory analysis. And he provides the link. Now wearing your PBIX cap in Australia and proudly getting eye rolls from my MS. Cheers, Gabriel. Cheers back to you, Gabriel. Thank you for the question posed that we're going to be talking about today.
Super great question.
And episode 117 was another Enrico Bertini episode, the asking the right data questions.
From the misses. That's probably what that meant. Eye rolls from the misses.
Oh, yeah. There you go. Correction.
Oh, yeah, from my Microsoft. So
this is a really good article. And I think we've talked kind of about problem solving and how do you scope things out and how do you narrow down what you're going to be building inside reports. And I think, I'm taking this of the lens of, I read the article. It kind of leads with, there are 7 steps that they use to understand a problem, to define what a problem is. There's a process around it. So I'm going to just quickly touch on the different steps, and then maybe we start diving into each of the steps that comes across here. Anyways, thought a lot of good points here. The seven steps are: step number 1, define the problem. Step number 2, use logic trees to disaggregate the problem. Step 3, prioritize. Step 4, create a work plan. Step 5, do the analysis. Step 6, and they kind of lumped step 6 and step 7 together. And I think these were the right points that they were trying to make. Step 6, synthesize the solution. And then step 7, create the story around the solution. So those are kind of the key steps around the article. Just going to kind of start there and just kind of leave it open. What do you guys think?
I want to ask you guys, in the context of Power BI or in our worlds, you can apply this in a lot of places, but where do you feel the highest priorities or the most frequent that we're dealing with this? Is this project building? Is it a model? I think we can apply this to everything, but where do you really see this playing out with the Power BI world or the BI world?
I think I'm gonna take a holistic approach here, just very briefly, because this is stuff that I'm just kind of working on in my current clients right now today. When you get Power BI, you get really excited about doing this new data thing. And I think with Power BI, and particularly when you start thinking about like a report that you're going to build, you're focusing on a very small section of the entire business's data model. So if you imagine to every company and just took a very high level look and said, okay, let's step back and look at all the things that have data and how does that data relate to each other? You have people, you have the various products, you have the sales channels, you have the different marketing efforts. Like if you looked at all the data that was there inside the scope of a company, there's only a set amount of things that you could slice or dice or cut the data by. And I feel like what Power BI does gives you this very small window of modeling that can let you stitch together a couple of those topics together to build out a report that answers a question about a certain thing. So when I look at this, and think about this question here. How do you define the problem? I think what we're doing with Power BI is we're defining very small problems potentially. And then if you collect all those small problems being solved with Power BI reports and you stand back, you see the entire scope of the company. So I think there's this really interesting play between how they're doing problem solving and then looking at like the data modeling. Where does the data go? There's a lot of technical challenges that go with this that Power BI solves for you.
Yeah, I mean, the application to me is in many of, like, to Mike's point, right? It's a problem solving strategy. So like if it's a specific report, if it's a series of reports based on a model, right? Like I like how they start off like, what should I do? Right. That's the whole point of, or the premise for coming up with their 7-step approach, because you're in the situation where what should I do? What am I supposed to build? How do I go define what that is that I'm supposed to be doing? Like, you're being
Exactly
tasked with something, and
what does success look like?
Here's the process by which you can get down to the clear actions of, delivering something that is useful to the end person, right? So the parallels here are for those of for those listeners who don't know our podcast by numbers, right? In 117, and the only reason I'm doing this is because I have my OneNote where I just scroll through things, right? But 117 is ask the right questions, right? So we talked a lot about like specific versus generic, like how do you get down to the right thing? And I actually love the fact that this is kind of a continuation of it, and a really good insight from Gabriel, because it can take us to the next level. It's like you ask all these questions, you're trying to do that first step, which is define the problem. And then in context, these are the different ways in which they break it down to peel it into action and then the deliverable that makes sense.
I totally agree with that.
And I mean, that's so true, right? Because I think a lot of times you're problem solving, you're thinking, well, something's really wrong. Well, yes and no, but it doesn't mean like you have a broken pipe and you have to fix it. I think a lot of times, like any report that we are tasked with, or any app, or any model that needs to be cleaned, it is technically a problem that we're coming into. It's not to the same extent, like I said, like there's a broken plumbing issue where things don't work. Things can still work, but I think taking this approach makes more than a lot of sense for especially what we do. And I think there's a lot of items in there I think that we can all translate to. Where I think it gets a little, we'll say, messy is, I think, I can easily apply this with Power BI models and building reports. Like, let's define the problem. What's the priority here? So what's the priority for the visuals? But a lot of times we're doing other bigger projects that are like, I think, adoption, or when we're dealing with changing people's process. Like I said, I've seen this a lot in the Power Platform, like when we're dealing with Power Apps. But when you're dealing with more people involved, how do you take our mindset of the importance of the data flowing, like being integrated and being analyzed the right way, but dealing with people who don't have that same mindset of problem solving, and then get them to try to get them on board? Because there is a bit of selling on this too. And I think that's where this gets messy.
But I think realistically here, this is what we've talked about previously in the podcast, is really this, define the insights. What are we trying to answer? And then look at the different insights that you're looking to accomplish within said report, and then really link that to an action. You can say things like, what color of our products are sold the most? Okay, but what's the action of that? Is there some sort of marketing activity that goes along with that enhances that? Or is there something else that we need to do? Like, so to me, a lot of this is, what they're defining in this step is defining the problem is so key. And I think, as again, my background as an engineer, I think there's many others. I don't see Dan Meisner on the call or the chat window yet, but he's my other resident engineer. And there's a very specific way you go around engineering and designing things. You have a very clear problem statement. You really narrow down what the issue is going to be, and then you solve for that particular problem. And I think that's a very good technique to use, especially when you're talking about modeling. If reports get out of hand, or reports gets built and they come back to the business and they're like, well, I didn't want that. Well, I think that really hinges on there was not a clear definition on what the problem statement was. What are we trying to solve?
So the thing that I hear you saying, Tommy, right? Like you compared report/model versus adoption and data flowing and integrating. Like to me, that's describing a small problem versus a large problem.
Yeah,
Right?
sure.
A small problem would be give me this report, right? Because the context is smaller. Like I only have so many different pieces that I could potentially explode. If you're talking about building an entire architecture of data flow to like translate between data sources, the systems you're going to use, the code, the people, the process, all of these things, the modeling, the warehouse to support a whole slew of reporting, right? That's a bigger problem to solve. So
Right.
contextually, you're going to have much more work in each one of these steps than you would with, just going and building a report. But that doesn't mean that the same process couldn't be done in both.
No, and I think what I was trying to compare, which I do agree with you're saying there, when you're dealing with adoption, it's a bigger, longer process. But I was speaking more on towards when you're dealing with people. Like if I go into a model that I need to build, I can easily go through the 7-step process alone because I'm building the report. There's not a lot of collaboration. But the problem is when we're dealing, and I think Mike, you made a really good point here. Where if we ask like, okay, you want to report on the product colors that are red, what are the things that are defining this, right?
What are we doing? Yeah.
Right.
What does that mean?
And
What's the action?
Yeah, and you realize, and I wish that people in BI had more leeway to say when people have no targets at all to like call them out on it, because like this is if you want to talk about a problem.
Well, and I think as a BI specialist, we have to somewhat push back on some of these requirements because I think I think so. Seth, you've said it like I think it was 2 or 3 episodes ago. You're talking about like, well, maybe we should just give them access to data and just say, okay, here's a swath of information. Go play with it for a bit. Go get familiar with information is in there, because the request, if you don't understand what data you're given or what data you can build on top of, they're going to come up with these really weird things that you're like, well, I don't even have the data to support that. Like, we have to go find that kind of insight or that information. So like there's a limit to what you can answer based on the data that you've been given. And maybe there's a question that needs to be answered that we, yes, in fact, actually need to bring some more data to this. But and we've also used this methodology, Tommy, to what you were saying. It's we need the ability to be able to rapidly prototype or get to a place where we think this thing potentially could add value or not. And I think this is where, Seth and I have talked about this a lot, especially when we were doing the consulting space. We want people to experiment and build on Power BI desktop files to get to a point where they kind of know what they're looking for. Push the business to be in front of the IT organization. Build the rapid prototypes. Get the stuff together. Build complicated Power Query M things, right? Because those are tools that the business can use to shape data to get it to a place where you can understand how it's working. And then once you have some of these, let's call them prototypes or early versions of reporting, then you can step back and say, okay, what are the things that we're talking about? And a lot of projects right now are doing that for me. They have these very specific questions, very specific needs, and there's all these hacky reports that are kind of around the periphery. And what we're doing is we're coming in and saying, okay, we have 30 reports. All of them have different versions of the same data. Let's look at all of that information and let's talk about what does the data model look like for the organization, and then pluck from that key tables that we need to support finance or operations or whatever those things are, because you don't need all the data, but now you have this holistic, call it data warehouse view of the information. And I don't think anyone's thinking about or planning for those activities. It feels like it's too big of a project to get done, but you're already essentially doing it when you build all these smaller reports. Is that making sense what I'm saying there? There's like a prototype quickly, step back, re-architect, and then enhance or optimize the next step. Are you guys seeing this, or maybe I'm the only one just doing something weird?
No, it is. It is. No, I do see it and I like it. The thing I like about this article that kind of interjects something in here is probably the like when you have the problem context, which we have talked about, the the logic trees,
Mm.
right? To segregate out the problem is
Yes.
where I think the analysis and the business logic and the business itself in the data
Yes.
is the step where it becomes irrelevant, right? Like we don't spend enough time, I think, talking about the value in the data, right? Like when I talk to my folks a lot, like they're struggling with a query, or they're not thinking through things, and if you've been working with any sort of language like SQL, for instance, right? DAX, you could do the same thing. You can step through it in business speak. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh, what you're doing here is we're starting with this, and then we're just adding a bunch of data because you're just doing left order joins, but what we're doing here is, oh, we're removing this information because of this reason, and we're adding this in, or we're looking at this time range because of that. And it's all business speak. You're not saying like,
Yes.
oh, because underscore dot dot whatever is this functional value in integer, and it means something. And I think that's one of the parts where, for a novice user stepping into an area, building a Power BI report or doing data modeling or anything, that analysis is key and often looked over, because you can quickly iterate through things, and you can build reports, and you can build these models. But if you don't have the context of the business, then you're putting yourself at a deficiency and potentially not delivering what you need to in the final results, because you don't understand where a problem would lie, because you don't understand the business behind the data. And that's
Yes.
what I like about that, where you have to
Yes.
separate out, like, I'm doing this because of this reason, or this is how this breaks down into this factor dimension, and this is what I need. But there's a reason that would tie out to, some visual or something, some page that you're going to generate. And that's where I really like that idea of like further adding to a lot of the process steps that we've talked about, because you can take it all the way to like an end point in a process by thinking through those steps and doing the analysis while you're architecting and doing the data build.
But we have to too at the same time, like, almost have a parallel process going on, because again, the important part of this being successful is working with the business. And we, in a sense, have to have these two mental models, or at least these two logic trees of what are we trying to do for the business, and how, getting them on board too, because they have to walk with us, right? Because, and this is, to me, this is the biggest issue in BI to this day.
Well, I think I see the logic tree as being, and I read that when I read a logic tree, I start trying to figure out what does that mean. And I was a little bit taken back by the concept of the logic trees and how does that, after you've defined a problem, the logic trees, I had a hard time thinking about what that meant. And how I interpreted that was, a logic tree is, here's the problem statement. Here are the various steps or things we would need to confirm that would get us closer to that answer, right? What are my sales year over year, right? That may be the insight, something like that. If you disaggregate that problem, you start talking about, okay, let's really define what is important here. Do we need to have this by salesperson, by region? Is there a target that we're looking for, right? So I feel like the logic tree is helping me go through and say, okay, take that larger problem statement or defining what the problem is. I need help figuring out what my sales are doing over time, something like along those lines. The logic tree helps me really pick that apart and figure out, okay, what data do I really need to support these various parts of that question? What are we trying to ask?
I'm going to argue, though, you're still thinking with the data mind, and you're not thinking like the business. Like, to us, this makes perfect sense on how we're going to build it. But again, I think a lot of times with the business, the way we speak on what are we trying to group by here, like, that's not going to resonate with them.
It does, though. I'm going to disagree with you here on this one. I think they don't think that way initially, but our job is to help them think that way, because that's what the data model technically does. I mean, all a data model is doing. I mean, Power BI is great on two things: filtering and aggregating. That's what it does. If you're trying to do iterations or other kind of calculations, you're going to be in a world of hurt, and it's going to get way harder for you to build those things. So everything we build in the data model is all around filtering and aggregating. And that's why we love star schemas, because that is really designed for filter and aggregation. And I think I'm right with you, Tommy. Like, if businesses aren't thinking that way, what is the data we're trying to calculate, and what are the cuts of that data? How we're going to slice and dice this thing? If they're not thinking that way, then that's a miss right from the very beginning.
So no, what I'm saying, and we have to be able to translate their needs into that, but they don't necessarily have to think that way into the data mindset. Like they could say,
Not
I don't
100%.
trust.
I agree with you. I agree with you. But that's what we're doing when we define the problem and understand what the context is of that conversation. You're doing that all before we're talking about logic trees.
Yeah.
Yes.
But so yeah, we are taking a bit of a back step. I think this goes back to translating the problem the right way, right? So no one's going to say, I need to really group the Northeast based on a bar chart year to over year. They're not. Some people
No,
may
but you're
speak that
you're
way.
teasing. The language we're using is what is very business BI centric. Or trying to tease out of them is what are the different cuts of the data. They're saying it just in a different way. So it's our job to help them think that way, because then it makes it easier for everyone to understand. Again, we're trying to communicate to them in a language that is data driven, and we want them to understand how does the data work, and so they have to understand that.
I would argue that part of empathy too is speaking their language and listening to them, not necessarily them.
No, they must do whatever I say all the time.
Yeah, exactly. I know. Besides that, only the mic. So yeah.
When the world learns this, everyone will be better off. I will say what it sounds like. What it sounds like to me. Hang on, is you guys are, to me, we're
probably splitting hairs.
You're talking about, to me, different phases. Initially, when you're doing report requirement gathering, when you're asking like, what is the intent, what are the actions you're going to take out of it, like what are the insights we need to drive, like to me, that's a very high level conversation.
Totally.
I'm looking to derive their understanding, what they're going to do with this, like the high levels to allow me to start like figuring out what I'm going to do.
Yes,
I'm not interjecting any of my world into theirs. I'm just absorbing, kind of like what Tommy's saying, like I'm absorbing what they need with the context and the questions that I need to get the information that I need to start. Mike, to your point, I think after that first iteration, right, where we're potentially getting down to like understanding the context, doing a logic tree exercise, right?
Yes.
That's when I re-engage with them, Tommy, and I'm like, great, here's where I see things going based on our conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what we're going to produce for you, because I have to start talking about an output.
Yes.
Right. So then it absolutely makes sense to do a version of like what I'm going to produce, talking in generics of like, we're going to use a trend here, and I'm going to show you a line chart that's going to be, your sum of sales over time. The thing I need to understand from you is, how do you want to slice that time? Do you want it by week, by quarter, by month? Like, because you're bringing them into the world of like, you're going to be looking at this output of a report, and you need to understand the dynamics of what I'm presenting to you, because I don't want to put all that in a text page and just assume you're going to know it.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, and Seth, as always, at the 35-minute mark.
Boom. Comes in with a big knowledge drop.
I think that's a really good point, because you may deal with someone where they're big at the empathy. Their problem is, I don't know if we should invest more in the Southeast region. Do I need to hire another BDM? And we shouldn't spit back, do you need dimensions? Like what? Like, at that point,
I'm not saying that.
Right. No, I know you're not. But
I mean, but those are like, that's a different kind of reporting, I think. So, I mean, there's also what I would look at, like, as you look at the maturity curve of like how companies work with data, there's most companies are in the reporting historical numbers only, basically is it. And then as you move up that curve, you start getting into like instead of what happened, what recommend, and what are the recommendations that should happen. So as you get further up that area, not what did happen, but what should I do? And those are things like you get into like really very well data-driven things. That's like what you see in like Amazon when it's recommending other products that you should buy, because it's looking at other people who bought things and said, oh, these 3 products were bought together, or hey, here's other recommended products that are similar in nature.
Because it was listening to you on your phone when you were talking about that new TV with your wife.
It's amazing how good they are anymore. It's crazy.
This does go back to my problem though. The issue with the technology nowadays, where like people think of reports as a historical thing, and part of that adoption curve is no, we can actually help you with those problems that you actually have. And a lot of times people don't, and departments do not feel like they need to tell us, like, I don't know if I need to invest in the, like in a region, right? Or I don't know if I need to fire someone, but those are their problems. Those are not their data problems, but ultimately they are. But before Power BI, we talked about this, like we were all in a space where we would work on very ad hoc, targeted problems.
Yes.
For one, it was like kind of that storytelling, but it was like a PowerPoint slide with the data that supported it. And then we move on to the next thing. And people see Power BI and go, well, I guess you just do historical. So here's what I need historically. So I think that's part of that empathy side where no, tell us what your actual problems are. And I tell this in projects all the time. Don't think of this and forget Power BI right now. Forget we're talking about data.
Yes, because people love showing up and saying, I need this table. I need this chart.
Right.
And you're like, no, let's step back.
And when we're defining the problem here, it's like, no, tell me what you're dealing with when you excuse me, when you first sit down at your office in the morning. What are you dealing with, and what's keeping you up at night? And forget if we're building a report, like what are those things, and then we can define the problem statement, and then we can really dive into, like, again, like working on this problem solving. But we have to be aligned with the business. And I know we say this, I feel like every podcast, but it's so integral.
Yeah, I would agree with that one. I think moving forward through some of these steps here, right? So we've talked about like defining the problem immensely. We talked about trying to disaggregating the problem and defining logic trees, or if we think about this, then do that. If we think about this other option, go over here. The next step, I think, in the process is really around like prioritizing the work, what to work on first. And I think this is actually it's not glossed over in the article. But I think this one's higher. This is harder than it looks.
Yeah,
I think this is a hidden effort. That is
the hidden. This is a hidden gem.
I wanted to say hidden gem, but I didn't really want to say it. It's something that I think is underrated, right? When you prioritize the work, or you could be solving the same question 4 different ways. How do you know which is the best way? And I think as consultants, we do this a lot, or even BI leads, whatever. You do a lot of. Someone asks you, hey, I need to change, like even thinking about how you build a report. I need this to be a bar chart or a line chart, whatever those things are. Or the requirement comes in where you're doing so how do you prioritize? You could solve that problem a number of different ways. So what's the best way to solve that problem? And I think you have to kind of like stack rank things a lot of times when you're building reports or data models. Where can we turn up the most value for the least amount of work?
This is a good one too, because we're dealing a lot with, when you realize in any report or any project, we can build anything they want, and they have grandiose plans.
Yes.
We build anything under the sun, and this is part communication and understand, like, look, we could do X, Y, and Z, and we can do this really complicated thing that would really show you things, proactive way.
Yep.
But, and again, Mike, you've spoken to this a bunch of times, where the more we build, the more we understand the hours that it takes.
Yeah.
But it's communicating that, not just, we'll see what we can do. It's like, well, no, like we can get you this project, example A or box A. If you open box A, here's what you get.
Yep.
You can get box A in a week. If you want box B, well, we can do it, but it's going to take a lot more testing.
Yes.
And it's really prioritizing those little things too.
I do a lot of this. I do a lot of t-shirt sizing. They're like, hey, I want to build this thing. I'm like, okay, that's a small t-shirt. That's something that's light effort, not hard, right? And then someone will say, well, I want this, crazy map, and I want it to pop out this, and I want to have these pop-ups, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's a large effort. Like, people don't know what they're asking for or how hard things are. Again, we've talked about this again a lot. We have this framework of Power BI. If we stay in the walls of the framework, it's easy to build things.
Right.
As soon as you start stepping closer to the edge or outside of that framework, it becomes much more challenging. Or you're talking about building a full-on custom visual kind of thing. Like, is it worth our time to do that?
You gotta
I
give
don't.
people their own cost benefit.
Yeah.
I think where this one strikes me is the novice user versus somebody who has more experience, or you follow a process like this, because where you get in trouble with the outcome of a logic tree, right? If you have a whole bunch of things you're going to go build, the in general, the person who just goes and starts building them, gets into trouble more often than not, because you're not taking the time to figure out which parts of the report, which parts of the project or whatever are most impactful to the business.
Yes.
So you could waste a ton of time.
That's true.
On areas that are not valuable.
Yeah.
You actually, like, there are cross business unit parallels here, right? I'm selling something for a fraction of what it's going to take the organization to build, but I don't care. I'm just going to sell it, right? Like that happens a lot in organizations.
Totally.
And like prioritizing, a slight segue, but it might be real. The prioritization of where you spend the majority of your time should be in the places that it creates the best value for the end user, right?
100%. Yes.
And that's why you have this step in there. But I think when, like I said, if you don't think about it, you're just going to be like, okay, great, this is what I need to go build. And then you go build it. And then to your point, Mike, somebody asked for some visual and you spend, 2 weeks on one visual, and the value of it
that page
is
never
like
gets
maybe
used.
2%, right?
Yeah.
But
you lose the audience or something. Yeah. And I'm of the opinion a lot of the times when I'm building reports is build something simple first, build something that is just something that people, so one of the challenges I find with prioritizing is people don't know what they want. They think they do, but more often than not, I'm changing things after they've observed, like, okay, we talk about these things. I talk about the data, and yeah, you can have all these grandiose ideas about, hey, this is how I should build and formulate this report and visuals. But until they see it and they actually see their data inside that visual, they may be like, well, I've done this before. We had like this nice diagram of like, hey, we're going to put a bar chart here. We're going to see what the data looks like in this bar chart. The first 2 bars were ginormous, and every other bar was like almost non-existent. Right. You have this long tail with lots of details, and you're like, well, that's not helpful. All we see from this chart is 2 things are important, and everything else is not important. Like, so you have to like, okay, how are we going to re-show this visual to emphasize things that are like, is there a setting on the visual? Right. Do we use the zoom slider on the visual to like help you emphasize certain portions of the chart so you can zoom in and zoom out on different areas? I think I think it has to change.
And I think a priority this phase 2 also goes into the sandbox phase when we talk about Power BI build. Yes. Where I think you're making the good point, and I have this like same very similar example. I had a client who wanted to look at things on like every day of the week, but they really cared about Saturday and Sunday. And when you looked at it, it's like, we can just group these together so you can see weekday versus weekend. They're like, oh no, I need to see like the whole day. It's like, why? And then you saw them went, I'm like, this is showing you how much compared to the weekend. That's what
and that's what you're looking at.
And immediately there's like,
a light bulb kicks off. You're like, oh yeah. And what are we really analyzing? Yeah.
Right. And but I think for you youngins out there, or just starting in your Power BI your journey, don't gloss over the fact that if you prioritize the wrong things initially, this is something that is hard to get back in terms of how people perceive you. And again, speaking from experience here, but really, if you're like, yeah, we can get that for you, you want everything, sure, and then it's a month later and you're still working on a problem, and people just wanted that simple thing, or they didn't need, as to your guys' point, to not have all the data or not be as complicated. I always take this step for the sandbox phase, 1,000%. Like, you can't prioritize something without knowing from someone's like, hey, here's a framework. We have 2 pages we built. Let's do something together. Yes. And then that's when you see the light bulbs come off. So there's no way we can prioritize alone. So
new BI in the comments are talking about, when the user asks, and this is when users don't know what they want, they just say, I need all the data. Yeah. There's so many other like things that are going on. And that when they say that moment, when they're saying, I just need all the data, it's telling me they don't trust the information you're giving them. There's a trust issue. and there's like and they don't understand maybe where it's coming from and how it's getting there. So the I need all the data comment is like, I don't understand what you're doing, or I don't trust what you're providing to me. I need all the data so I can perform my own analysis on the side that gets me the information. And this is also where like we go back up to like defining the problem. One of the major questions that should be in define the problem is, are you looking for access to data, or are you looking for insights on data? You start there, because I guarantee you a majority of your requests are, I just need access to the data, which is a totally different build than help me figure out the insights on top of the data.
See, I have a different take on I need all the data. I don't think it's a trust thing. It might be a data access thing. But if somebody is requesting a report and it's like, okay, well, what do you need to see? I need to see all the data. That means to me, either they're in a job where they have to analyze all the data, and that's usually not the case, or they don't know enough about their own business or their area to be able to articulate what the data is they need to see, right? And at which point, that's exactly where, okay, well, here's access to the data.
Yes, correct.
Right? When you're ready to have a conversation on like how I can help you produce a report that would make you not have to go through hours and hours of analysis, I think you're forcing them into the thought process where you want them to be, which is you like get out of this virtuous wasted time mindset where you're consistently just moving data once you've done the analysis and figured out like what are the insights you want to get from it, right? And that's where like sometimes people aren't ready to go into the sandbox. Like they need a report, so they shoot off a request. But the reality is they need to go back and they need to do their own definition of the problem, their own logic tree, like their own understanding of their business area and the data that they want, so that we can help them. Because there's a lot of value in us producing the insights we can in modeling and reporting and pre-calculations and all of these things to summarize information for them to make decisions faster. But it's a dead conversation if they can't have a conversation about it. And that's where people usually say, just show me everything. Like, no, that's not the point of this. This is not why we go through these exercises. This is not why we spend the time doing it. Here's some data you can access. Let's have a conversation later on.
I am curious about the psychology, though. If you checked your bank account this morning and there were $300, you're like, what happened? And someone's like, well, you don't need all the money right now. You just need some of it for today. Maybe there's some like
I'm not saying remove insights.
Right.
I'm not.
No. But I think for someone when they don't see all the data or when there's filtered out, and I think goes back to the communication. If you provide the report at the end of the day, and you filter everything out, they're like, but I do need to see that, or I would like to. You're like, well, it's not there.
But I think, Seth, you hit the nail on the head there with your comment. Like, yeah, there potentially could be a trust issue, right? But there's also like a knowledge lack potential that's going on here too. I just don't know enough about my data to even ask the right questions. So I need all the data so I can discover what needs to happen. I think it's a very valid point. Yeah, I like that one a lot. Just want to move on to the next step, work plan, and do the analysis. Close to the end here. All right, we'll move on to work plan. So the last, I think after the first part of these things, define the problem, logic trees, prioritizing your work. I think that's a lot of like setup, right? And it's fine. It's interesting to me that the first three steps are literally about like planning, defining, planning, organizing. And then only now halfway through the solution process, you start doing like, okay, build out the work plan. How are you going to accomplish this stuff? And then doing the analysis is a step number 5. Thoughts on that and how that works for you guys in the data space?
I think for me, it goes to what we talked about after we do the priority, right? I mean, it makes sense, obviously, in the order that it's in, but in the context of building a report or building a model or migrating something over, where there are people involved. And I think a lot of times we deal with the issue where we think, okay, I can do everything myself, but we have to bring in the stakeholders at certain times. And I think that's part of the saying, what are your role? Like, what is the stakeholders' role at this phase now that we're going to start building? And it's to prove and to make sure we're on the right step. Generally speaking, instead of team members too, we could really just say, I don't know, like you could put that into the different components of like what DAX we need to build, what's the star schema look like, and that's really the structure to me at this point more.
That's where I was going. I was thinking about, breaking the work apart. There's definitely different people that are doing different areas of work around this, right? Some of this could be like the person who's in the SQL server building the views that you're going to use in the data model. And then there's the guy who's doing the data modeling. So there's potentially a whole bunch of DAX things that need to be written. And then there's the person who's building the report potentially. That could be all and well the same person. But when you're, in the article, it talks about like breaking the team into team members and figuring out, again, these are probably like bigger problems. Like, hey, I'm going to build a rocket ship. You just don't have one guy building the rocket ship. You have lots of teams building the rocket ship. So in the same way, and maybe it's a smaller scale, you're having a person or people work on different parts of that data model. You're breaking them down to, okay, here's what we need. We know we're trying to solve these problems. We've looked at the data. We need this transformation done upstream. We need these things built as measures, and we need this thing to be built as the report. So I think it really speaks to, man, I just can't get over it. Like, I just love the whole thin, the model and thin report design. It just works so good. To me, that's like everything I build starts that way. Just always. It just seems to make a lot of headaches go away when I just build from that way.
Wait till you get composite models, my friend. Well, cool. That world's coming for you.
I don't know. I mean, I control so much of the back end. I don't feel like I need composite models.
I'm telling you, you're going to be doing a user group on it.
You're going to do it on it.
Oh,
I would be like, don't use it. End of story. Walk away.
Well, but you actually do raise a good point there when it comes to the world we live in now and the Power BI world, where we're not just dealing with single models.
Correct.
Or you have to decide, like, and maybe part of the work plan is, do I need to scale this out right now? Where are there going to be other things built? So maybe you do need technically all the data right now, right?
Maybe,
because if you're building that targeted report and you're filtering everything out, then this gold model thin report's not going to work. But could I use this scenario in other circumstances? Then you are going to load in more of the data, not for that single report, but for the model itself.
Yes.
And I'm sure someone could argue back, like, well, you can always go back and unfilter things. Like, it does not work that way, or it does not work that easy. Where I think this needs to be part of the planning process and this story for a model.
That's also interesting, because when I look at like how much data do you bring to a data model, I also think there's not a good requirement around. I think people think of I need all the data, but there is some kind of design implications that are important to consider when you're starting to talk about how much data you bring to the report.
Because you may do a lot of the transformations in Power Query when you don't have all the data, and it works great. But if you're needing to apply that same thing and do all these calculated columns or all these things in a bigger model,
don't build calculated columns.
It's a feature. It's available. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not saying it's a good feature.
Just don't do it.
If
let everyone else know.
They didn't want you to do it.
There are lots of features that are available that you may not want to use.
Natural Q&A. I think that's don't use it.
We all got.
I don't know. To me, work plan strikes up
in the closet. Okay.
That match between like breaking down the different tasks, but in a planned and organized way that you can shuffle between a team, right?
Yeah.
If you're doing a report, but also on more of the project level, right? Understanding like, okay, we now know what we need to go build. How long is it going to take? What are the resources I'm going to use to do it? When can we tell the business we're going to execute by? Those are all important things in setting expectations in delivery.
I like what you say there, Seth. I was thinking about, planning the crud of the report, right? I mean, a lot of times we plan for the creation of reports, the maintenance of reports, but we don't necessarily plan for the obsolescence of the reports. Or is there a planned time that we're going to come back and review? Is this report still working for us? Do we still use it or not? So I think part of my work plan would be around identifying what does success of this report look like and how are we tracking if it's working or not. I'd add that in there.
Could do
like
that.
Tommy, your great talk around why people aren't using your reports.
Right. Well, and I think both ends of it though too. Now, I guess this is definitely a depends answer, but I'll still ask regardless because maybe it's not. But is every report needs to go through that same process of, do we need to be planning for retirement, or do we need to be planning to scale up for every single request? How do you know when to, in a sense, not even make that decision, but to bring that question up of, does this report have the potential to become a dependent, like a gold report or gold data set?
How, like, why would that be part of the conversation in the beginning?
What?
Isn't that a usage thing?
No, because I would disagree. It's a usage thing. A gold data set is, again, where you have the thin reports on it. You may have a very particular situation with the report, so the gold data set doesn't make sense. Like, what are you going to build off of it? But you may have something in there where the model itself is going to be something a lot larger, and you can build multiple reports off of it. Well, I'm arguing that, well, at what point in the process do you at least bring that decision? Maybe it's in that decision tree where, does this report have the potential to be a master data set?
Okay.
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I think.
I mean, it depends on the scope of what we're talking about, right?
True.
So yes, that could be an outcome of your logical decision tree, right?
See, I would argue it has nothing to do with the usage. Usage is for the report.
I think usage is important.
Yeah, no, but not for to say, do we need to build a master data set though?
Why would you spend a lot of time to build a master data set that no one's going to use?
Okay, I see
that would be my argument for like why usage is important, right? If you expect a lot of people to use it,
prioritizing the things that would make the biggest impact on the company.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, I'll concede that. Yes, we'll use data in our own analysis as well. That makes sense.
But I think you're right, Tommy. That like the point there is like, build something, but plan on measuring it. At least have some kind of like metering that's going on there. I think it's important because we spend all this time and effort. Like, we don't want to spend a week or 2 weeks on building something and then just have it not be used. Like, there could be a slight miss on what we built that's just not meeting the need, or people just aren't using it. Well, let's figure out why that is, and let's revisit why it didn't successfully go the way we thought.
And to your point too, the other end of the spectrum is also on, can we at least have a time frame for this report? Maybe it is just for this quarter, and then we need to revisit it, but put that actually on the schedule.
Exactly. Plan it. Let people know what's going on. Another part you guys brought up here that was, let's see where I had my notes here. One thing that I think we haven't touched on yet is the data quality part, right? I think a lot of times we build reports, shove it out there, but where's the data quality, or let's call it, for lack of a better term, data ops on when you deploy things? What does that look like? When do you know the data is good or not? And who's checking that? That should be part of our process, especially when we're talking like certified or data sets that are going to be like company wide. How do we give trust to the data? I don't know where that fits in this. Be
breaking it into the team members, right? That probably in your work plan right here, right? Like, that's got to be part of the process. I do like the comment like that came in through LinkedIn. It sounds like somebody made a comment that it sounds like what we're talking about is the SDLC process, right? Software development lifecycle. Yeah, there's a lot of parallels.
Yes.
Between our conversation today around the article and this. I guess, just for my closing thought, the thing I love about this is, it sounds like the organization that the gentleman works for that was being interviewed, they have this 7-step immersive training for all their folks, right? And I think that's what's really important is locking in on a process for teams that they consistently follow, where you're being able to produce a lot of these insights as well as then executing on them while making the biggest impact. And really, it's focusing all of your attention and area on those areas as the biggest priority, and then coming back or solving the ancillary side stuff in a different way, or potentially in a second wave.
I think one of the key things that stuck out to me in this article was it kind of concludes with this takes an incredible amount of empathy to do this process, because you have to put your preconceived notions of how you would solve things or how you want to answer the questions, and you need to listen a whole lot more. Like, what is the problem? tell me where the challenge is. I think there's that need for more empathy really resonated with me, because yes, I have a ton of empathy for things. I just do. It's just kind of part of how I like to run things, I guess. I don't know. But I feel like that empathetic part of it just works so much better when you're focusing on the needs of someone else and trying to understand their needs, as opposed to just trying to solve their needs with just your preconceived notions on how to solve it.
It's funny, we always go back to the empathy thing, and I agree. It all starts with that side. The definition, one of the definitions of compassion, or like I guess when you translate into Latin, is to suffer with, which I kind of love too, because we have, in order for us to be able to do the step one, define the problem, we're not defining that problem for us for again like the star schema. We're trying to define the problem for that user who's banging their keyboard, or like whatever their frustrations are. Like we can help with that, but we have to understand that even if it doesn't directly translate to a star schema or to a model, right? Being able to understand the problem, that I mean, when I don't have that, like real understanding of their use case of what this applies in their real life, it's like you're kind of dealt with a blank canvas, and you're building things that don't matter. And it's frustrating for us too, because we don't have any direction. But when we actually have like, oh, I know this weekday thing, going back to that, like that really affects X, Y, and Z for them. I'm going to highlight that. I'm going to highlight and think of different ways I can highlight that. Totally. Even if you're building. So yeah, this is, but going back, yeah, this is all phenomenal for us to really structure the way we build our reports. Again, it's not necessarily just a problem. It's someone coming up to us that needs a solution.
This works on everything. This is not just reporting specific. Right. I mean, I think you could use this problem solving solution thing and anywhere, but it feels like there's a lot of steps to it. It feels like there's a lot going on here that just to solve a problem. I feel like sometimes I shortcut a lot of these things and just quickly get to the answers that I want, because it feels like it's a long process. But I can resonate with it because I am an engineer, and I feel like this is a lot of what I'm taught in school as well. Awesome. Well, with that, you've burned through.
Either way, thank you once again, Gabriel, for sending in the question and giving us a podcast to talk about.
Yeah, exactly right. So I want to say thank you, everyone, for listening and participating. A lot of good chat in the chat window. So thank you all for sending in your comments and your thoughts around the topic. If you like this topic, if you thought it was a good discussion, got your brain thinking about how to solve problems and using this article, please, we would love it if you would share the content with somebody else. So share it on social media, or share it with someone in work who may find this content valuable as well. With that, where else can you find the podcast, Tommy?
You can find it anywhere it's available: Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. If you are watching right now live or watching a previous live, subscribe on Apple and Spotify. You can listen to audio, run or jog or cook with it. If you're listening right now, I don't know. If you're cooking or if you're listening to it, make sure to subscribe live, join the conversation. And again, the biggest thing you can help us out, spread the word, share it with somebody you know in the space. That is the number one top 100 out of 100 way you can help us out.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you on Thursday.